Greetings, this is John Jackson Miller. I am the founder and curator of Comichron.com, which is the world's largest public database of comic book sales figures, and we also have a lot of other information on comics history, including comics cover prices across time and various other things. And one of the most popular features that we have is, of course, our monthly sales report that tracks the sales of comics into comic shops from Diamond Comic Distributors, which is the main distribution company in North America. And what we have is a database that goes back to when I started doing this work. I actually began tracking the comics industry as editor of Comics Retailer magazine in 1993, but I didn't start doing the Diamond monthly sales charts for publication until 1996. I have now been doing that every month, in and out, for almost 22 years. And so I've seen quite a lot of the ups and downs of the business. And one of the things that I've done is I've made this material available, both the modern current monthly numbers and also everything that I've got going back with regard to this data set. And in the future, I'll be running that even further back as I start putting more archival numbers into the system. But one of the things that people have been asking for quite some time is that I do a video version of the report that I do every month, announcing what the estimates are that we have generated based on the information that Diamond Comic Distributors has released. So here's just a sort of a real quick walkthrough of the findings for this month. And you will find them on our website, Comichron.com. Any place you go, if you go to the monthly sales page, you'll find a menu of all the various different monthly sales reports that we've got. And the one at the very bottom is going to be the most current one. And of course, that's the monthly sales report for March here. March is the last month of the first quarter of the year, obviously, and we have always kind of had a term for the first quarter. It's in comics. It's often been called the dead quarter. In part, that's because obviously there's fewer people coming into stores when you have bad weather in places like the Midwest or the Northeast, and certainly we had that to spare in March this year. And we also have the publishers reacting to that by basically putting less material out into the system. So the volume of material that is out there is less. And so what we've often said is that, while what happens in the first quarter of the year is important to the overall health of the business, it's not as important as other quarters. All quarters are not created equally, and we have seen in past years a number of times where a poor winter has been offset just by the month of April or just by the month of May. Again, the volumes are so much lower in that time of year. Now, it is not always the case that the winter months are bad or that nothing important is released in them. Most notably here in the past few years, we had Star Wars being re-released by Marvel when they got the license back in 2015, and that happened in January, and that was huge. And then, going even further back, we have had a number of events that dropped in the first quarter of the year. That's when I guess it was 2002, Dark Knight Strikes Again came out, and then going back to when we get to 95 and 96, you had the Age of Apocalypse, and then Marvel versus DC was in 96. Those were both in the winter months, and even though those were important and successful projects in those years, 95 and 96 were pretty obviously negative years for the history of the business because of what else was going on in the market. So, sometimes a good winter can still be, a harbinger of not much. and also sometimes a poor winter. You may not say a lot about what happens in the rest of the year. So with that in mind, just quickly go into what we have in March 2018. Yeah, this is a month that I had alerted everyone beforehand that it was going to be down, and that's because of the calendar. The month of March in 2017 had 5 Wednesdays. This March had 4 Wednesdays. Again, this is something that we report here on the website, and we keep that always in mind because the fact that you've got those extra days in the month means that in a 5-week month, the odds of a comic book shipping in that month are higher. Even though comics are monthly generally, and you won't see 13 issues necessarily coming out in a 5-week month, you have all the reorders that are coming in from retailers all the time. So that's an additional amount of material that all things being equal, is more likely to wind up in a 5-week month than in a 4-week month. And then you also have a situation where graphic novels are not really tied to a monthly release schedule, so they're going to land when they land. And so what we found over time is that a 5th week will generally result in something like 10 to 14% more material and 10 to 14% higher sales on average than a 4-week month or a 4 Wednesday month. And this obtains whether or not we lose that 5th week to or we lose a week to holiday shipping or something like that, which can often happen in the winter time around Christmas, or just the natural breakdown of the calendar. So anyway, we knew that we were going to be down somewhat, and what we wound up with was a month which was, and we'll come down here and see in the bottom line for the month, $38.48 million worth of material was purchased by retailers. That's at full retail value, and it was down 16% versus the same month the previous year, only down 7% versus the same month in 2013, and then up 23% over the same month in 2008. And obviously, prices have changed since then, so that figures into that somewhat. But one of the reasons that March 2018 was a better month than it looked like on paper is that even though we had less material in the system, it's still overall the numbers weren't that bad as a result. The unit sales and dollar sales for comic books, now this is just the periodicals, were only down 12% units, 13% dollars. And of course, that's up against the fact that we only released a much smaller number of comics in March 2018 versus March 2017. In fact, 98 fewer comics came out in the month of March in 2018 than in 2017, a drop of 22%. Well, our unit sales were only down 12%. So what that meant was that the comics that did come out did relatively better and punched their weight better. And one of the reasons that happened is because we had a number of comics that were sort of heavy hitters, so to speak, that punched better than their weight on average. And indeed, this month we have 3 comics above 100,000 copies shipped in the month. Dark Knight's Metal, which closed the Dark Knight's storyline, we have at 187,000 copies shipped to North America in the calendar month. Doomsday Clock 4, Rorschach gets his pancakes there delivered to him, and we have close to 150,000 copies there. and Amazing Spider-Man 797, which is beginning the end of Dan Slott's run on the title, 128,000 copies there. And note that this is not all the copies that were shipped of these comics. It does not count digital. It does not count anything that goes to Europe. It also does not count subscriber copies if those happen to still be around on certain publishers' titles. Archie obviously still has newsstand as well. So you have that in the mix too. And again, it also doesn't account for anything that happens outside the calendar month. One of the things that we added here this year as a response to the fact that Diamond went to releasing the top 500 titles, we expanded the columns here to include the on sale date. And we can see that our top 2 books of the month both shipped on the 28th of March. This is a column that you can sort either direction so that you can see all the books that came out just on the 28th of March, or you can see how far back some of the titles go. You'll notice that the oldest book that made the top 500 is actually the 501st place book this month because it tied with the 500th place book, and so Diamond released information about it, was the Image First's Lazarus book, which was a dollar title that Diamond had in its inventory since April 30th of 2014. One book from 2016 and then a few comics from 2017. Mostly, though, we have comics from 2018 here. It is notable, though, that something like I think the number is it's 65 different comics that were released earlier in 2018 did reappear. So you have mostly comics from March of 2018 in this chart, but you do have a number of repeat appearances from comics that already were in the January charts or the February charts. A good example of that would be down here at 400th place. Actually, it's going to be down here 401st place. That's Doomsday Clock number 3. That came out obviously on January 24th, but that reappears here in 401st place. So where those wind up is in the end of year totals, and I'll show in a few moments how everything for the year to date has worked out. So again, this month off somewhat, but the fact that January, which had our 5th week this quarter, and February were both only off a small amount relative to the declines we saw in the middle and latter portions of 2017, resulted in this quarter only being down 9%, a little less than 9%, on $114 million and change in comics and graphic novels being shipped to retail stores. And that makes it the smallest drop since the first quarter of 2017. It gets us out of the double-digit drops that we had for the quarters in the second, third, and fourth quarters of 2017. One of the things that's going on is that it has to do with the comparatives. When you're into the middle of 2017, you're up against the Rebirth months that when Rebirth was releasing from DC, the early issues in the summer and then into the fall of 2016, when you had, they were also doing, returnability on the first half dozen issues of each of the titles. And so the numbers for 2016 were really challenging to hit in 2017. It would have been challenging, even if the business had been running on all cylinders, and this was just not the case in 2017. So we saw some significant drop off in there. 2018, however, now we're getting up against some other later months in the whole rebirth event. While March versus March was not pretty because of the fifth week, well, the quarters are equal in the number of shipping weeks they had. So we had a quarter where, things were not quite as bad as they had been in a while, and the trajectory has been improving. I think we were off 16% in third quarter of 2017, 10% in the fourth quarter, now down under 9. So that gets us into single digits. That's heading in the right direction. Again, remember what I said at the top, the caveat having to do with the first quarter of the year, and how it doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot, but some stuff was going on in terms of the at the top of the charts you had the Dark Knights event, you had Doomsday Clock, and then you also had our high profile release here, Oblivion Song by Kirkman and DeFelici, which is not a title that had a whole lot of, or really any variants, as opposed to just about everything else on the chart, which has lots of variant covers. It simply had its main version and then a collector's version that was expensive enough that it does not appear on our rankings here. But that's in the top 10. So there's a number of things happening. Infinity Countdown, Weapon H, that was a book that was a bit of a surprise because it did not appear in the reorder charts that we publish every Wednesday here. And it probably appeared once. And so what that meant was that, it's that figure there is probably much more the initial order that retailers placed, as opposed to something that would have built up on lots and lots of reorders. Oblivion Song had lots of reorders, topped the charts for weeks. Doomsday Clock, Dark Knight's Metal both topped the reorder charts at various times. Infinity Countdown as well, and so the reorder charts can be important in terms of where things will end up ranking, and that's why we do report them. If you go on to the any place on the site here, you'll see that we have April already out. We say what the advanced reorders were for the month of April, what topped the charts in individual weeks, and then if you hit any one of these, you'll be able to go to the top 25 list. You also can see what did best for reorders, and I'll do a video at some point getting into the difference between reorders and advanced reorders. The top 300 comics for the month of March actually were only down 8% in units, as opposed to 12% for the overall grouping. What that tends to mean is that the top 300 captured a lot more of the sales than they normally do. And in fact, we can say that the top 500 comics, if you add all these together, and you'll find these totals over here on the side, it winds up being 6.45 million copies. So there's only 110,000 copies represented by everything that fell outside of the top 500. Again, what that means is there's less stuff out. When you have a 5-week month, what you'll see is these numbers here for the 300th place book or 400th or whatever will go up. And the reason they'll go up is because there's more comics up here higher in the list from the major publishers, which sort of raises the bar. to get into the top 300 or to get into the top 500. And so, we'll tend to see our lower numbers here in the 4-week months, and we'll tend to see the top 500 or top 300 representing larger portions of the overall number of comics released. In part 2, we'll get into the graphic novel part of the business and also discuss the top-selling comics of the year to date.